Scared for reals.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
And we're here to talk about a legendary filmmaker, actor, persona, Jose Mojica Marins. He was actually born this month, back in 1936. And what an icon. He's a cult icon. I mean, this is a guy who made the first Brazilian horror film. 60 years ago, Coffin Joe was born. It wasn't called Coffin Joe at the time. It was in the 80s where they came up with that name. And it not only became a persona, but he literally was Coffin Joe.
Yeah.
Not only was a filmmaker, actor, but also screenwriter, and he did the Coffin Joe thing on TV. He was like a host, Elvira and all of that.
Yeah, he was a horror host.
He did all these horror shows, and he actually had hosted a variety show as Coffin Joe later on in his life. He was always surrounded by cinema. I mean, he grew up, his father ran a theater, so they lived like in the flat right above the theater, so he literally grew up in the movie theaters.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
So, I mean, he was shooting short films when he was just a kid. He lived, breathed film pretty much his whole life. I'm looking at his bio here. Not only did he make short films with a camera, but he got his neighbors involved, and they were exhibited at churches, amusement parks, and 18 years old. Okay, Adam, you and I, what were you doing when you were 18?
Graduating high school and playing Green Lantern at the Six Flags Great Escape.
Nice. Yeah, I was in college when I was 18. This guy founded a film company, the Atlas Film Company, when he was 18. So what he did is he acquired this abandoned church, transformed it into a film studio and an academy. He gave out acting lessons, trained technicians so he could make money to finance his films.
Wow.
I mean, he didn't have the look of John Cassavetes. Like, you remember John Cassavetes?
Yeah.
Right? You know, Rosemary's Baby. He starred in The Dirty Dozen, which got him an Academy Award nomination. He was a film star, but he took all of that money and put it into his movies. Where this guy, he had to be very more creative in how he, funded his films. And I mean, he's noted for his horror films, but the guy made melodramas, westerns. But, I mean, 1964, Well,
Coffin Joe is,
Yeah, I mean,
he's an icon. I mean, again, I haven't seen all much of any of his movies, but I definitely had heard about him and knew about him just through the horror community. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of foreign films.
We're going to hopefully change that at some point.
Yeah.
Not force you.
No. I just, my attention span of trying to read captions while I'm trying to watch a movie is just limited right now. So, but
it's like you don't even realize you're watching. Like, look, the subtitles kind of blend in with the movie after a while. For me, I don't even realize they're there. I mean, I guess subconsciously they are there, but it's not like I'm mindful of it.
Right.
It's just part of what it is. And I have, we don't have surround sound, so we have the subtitles on anyways. It's so annoying because if you don't have subtitles on, you miss some of the dialogue. You know what I mean?
Right.
You've probably been there. It's like, what was that? And you have to put this, there's dialogue happening that you can't even hear because you don't have surround sound.
Right.
We're not going to pull the trigger on surround sound. It's just kind of expensive to say the least. But so your first experience was watching, the Strange World of Coffin. That's the only one you've seen, right?
Yeah. It's streaming on Shudder. That's the only one I've had access to. I know the big box set is out.
Arrow Video did this amazing box set with 11 films. And that's the thing. There's only technically 3 Coffin Joe films. You've got This Night, I'll Possess Your Corpse. That was the second one. At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul is the first one. And Embodiment of Evil. Those are the 3 official Coffin Joe movies. I mean, yes, he had the persona, like the one you watch, Strange World of Coffin Joe. He's not really in it. He's like hosting.
Yes, exactly.
Like an anthology of movies.
He's being the Undertaker character.
Yes. The Crypt Keeper. And that's a thing that, I was reading some stuff about Coffin Joe, and he kind of reminds you of The Shadow,
Kind of, yeah. Now that you say that, yeah.
And, because Orson Welles, famously, the radio program in the late 30s, The Shadow, and then there was other different types of characters of that nature, they envisioned the black hat and everything like that. And, you kind of wonder if somehow in Brazil, Jose Mojica Martins was able to actually like get a hold of these radio programs. Because, I mean, it's very reminiscent of those, especially the anthology movies that he'd make, Right. Did Mojica actually listen to these programs? Because, I mean, gosh, there's Alfred Hitchcock Presents and all these other things that came out before Coffin Joe did. Right. And that's the thing, like, I discovered Coffin Joe by mistake. Gosh, it was almost 20 years ago. Remember IFC? Yeah. This is before they aired commercials. way back, when I had satellite and I just happened to come across this strange black and white movie, and I'm like, what is this? Okay, it's I thought it was Spanish. Oh, it's Brazilian. Okay. But yeah, it was At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, and I was like, very hypnotic. I think that was the idea. Mm-hmm. Very hypnotic, and it was a nightmarish world, and like, this is interesting. And the violence, the way the violence was filmed, the way everything was filmed was, I've never seen anything like it before or since. I mean, just imagine being in a movie theater, in Brazil, and then At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. Again, this is the censorship had broken at this point, and it was left up to the states what they wanted to censor at the movie theaters. And just imagine being at a movie theater. You're like, oh, this is interesting. At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. What an interesting title. Yeah. And then you watch it. I mean, just imagine. Nobody had seen something like that. Yeah. I mean, 60 years ago. I mean, it was like, wow. And I tried to have that mindset when you're watching. Obviously, watching on a much smaller scale, but it's still. This guy was, you talk about pushing the envelope, and of course, Brazil, you have to remember, was under a brutal dictatorship that lasted for over 20 years. Right. So how he was able to push and push and push, because, I mean, he really took a huge jab at established religion. He, I guess he kind of grew up with a Catholic background from what I understand, just reading and watching different documentaries, but he grew up with a Catholic background. But I think it was like the established religion that really kind of just, he was kind of atheist-like in his thinking, but he pushed back on all of that and the way he felt about that, and he felt really strongly about children in all of his movies, because his character he wants, his idea of immortality is by finding the perfect woman and then doing the deed and having kids. The perfect woman. He's always looking in the first two Coffin Joe movies. And the third one, he finally finds it in a very strange way. And again, not all, these movies aren't like I wouldn't rate them like 5 stars, but first one especially I'd rate 4 stars, because it's just, again, originality and it's just interesting concept, finding the immortality to him is finding the woman and passing on his seed. And he's obsessed with that. Yeah. And it becomes an obsession. And the way he treats people in general is he's an anti-hero, but anti-heroes, they do you watch them, you understand them, but at the same time, this guy's not the nicest guy in the world, Yeah. But he has 21 years under a brutal dictatorship, and it's just how he was able to get these movies.
Well, and that's just kind of what got me doing my research for the show and learning a little bit about him. And like we were saying before we hit the record button today, you watch these movies. Obviously, they're in black and white, and there's
some. There's
some of the older ones are in color. I stand corrected, but the earlier ones that are in black and white, and there's a perception that just by default that if it's in black and white, it's kind of going to be a tame movie. It's kind of going to be easy to watch. There is some graphic stuff in these black and white movies, man. And it's unnerving to say the least. And
I think that's the idea. I mean, again, pushing back against establishment in general. I mean, yes, he created this Undertaker. Has like some Nietzsche vibes to him. Yeah. And again, hatred for organized religion, and you got to find that perfect woman. And I mean, that's what, the movies aren't that long either.
Right.
I think the first one's like 80 something minutes and the other one's 70 something minutes. The one you saw, I think, is not even 80 minutes long.
No. And it's a series of 3 short movies.
Right.
It is 80 minutes long.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I guess, the Coffin Joe thing was created so the American audiences can relate. Oh, the Boogeyman. Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees. Okay. Like nickname, a nickname that they can get, kind of relate to.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you watch these movies, they're very violent, finding the perfect woman, fighting back against established religion and stuff like that. We can kind of sort of understand, but we didn't live where he lived in Brazil under a dictatorship at that time.
Right.
We could talk about how the current government is, but we're not going to go there. But, I mean, yeah, he also dabbled into not only exploitation, but there's drug exploitation, sexploitation, and there's some of these movies in this amazing set from Arrow. I don't want to do an infomercial about this set, but some movies are better than others. But man, oh man, I mean, a guy doing 20 minutes just people getting whipped and tortured and raped, sodomized.
Like I said, it's for black and white movies. It's extremely graphic and it's disturbing. And again, like the naive perception that if it's a black and white movie, it's kind of tame.
See, I have a different idea of a black and white movie. Yeah. To me, a black and white movie, it kind of takes you to there is no like time stamp on it. I consider a black and white movie. It has that timeless appeal to it.
It does, but it also, can give you the perception of it's old. And it's an older movie. I mean, unless you're watching something like Ed Wood that that was made in the 90s and it was just an artistic, an artistic taste that Tim Burton made the movie in black and white.
But you go back to the Universal monster movies. Those were, they're tame now, but those were intense.
At the time, no. But like I said, that goes to their older movies. It's an older generation. It's an older,
but tame. You mentioned the words tame, not as violent. Yeah, at the time, those movies were considered violent. Some of those Universal monster movies and some of the Lon Chaney movies were made in the pre-code times, where there was a lot more you could like push the boundaries with.
Oh yeah, then let me explain my position. Like, I'm not saying that for the times that they weren't tame. I'm saying for this generation, you typically see a black and white movie and you think it's an older movie. And when you think older, you think, pre, we were, before we were desensitized by everything that came with the slasher genre and all the exploitive movies of the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. When you see a movie from the 60s and it's in black and white, you automatically assume it's going to be in that category like we perceive Frankenstein now. As it doesn't scare audiences anymore, but it's still a classic movie. It's still a timeless movie.
I would say it leaves an impression.
But when you see Coffin Joe's black and white movie, and you see mutilated faces and
eyes popping
out. It's like it hits you. You know?
Yeah, and George Romero obviously saw this too, I would imagine, because Night of the Living Dead.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it. Black and white horror movies are tame in the sense that just because it's black and white, it's tame. It's just the way cinema history has evolved over time, and the way this generation can perceive movies now. If it's black and white, it's old, so it's not going to be that crazy.
Well, and then you
see Coffin Joe.
I'm going to bring up Raging Bull as another example of a black and white movie that still to this day is shocking. Like on Turner Classic Movies, yes, the movie's 43 years old now, but Martin Scorsese he recorded like a warning with Raging Bull because of the brutality in that movie, beating up his wife, beating up his brother, the language. For 1980, I still can't get over how that movie got made. And going back to Coffin Joe, it's like 1964. I don't think these movies would have had a difficult time in being made in the U.S.
Right.
Because there's nothing in the 60s that I can think of. Night of the Living Dead isn't as brutal as At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, or at Midnight I'll Possess Your Corpse. None of those movies. George Romero, yes, he pushed the envelope, and yes, Mojica, he had like a very low budget, but George Romero's movies are very tame,
right,
compared to the Coffin Joe movies. Mm-hmm. And of course, he had to literally, he was up 5 nights straight trying to get these movies made.
Right.
Like he took these, I forget the name of the drug that can kind of keep you focused and going. It's not caffeine. It was one of those long Latin words I can't pronounce. Yeah. But you need a doctor's prescription now to get something like that, and they have to they run thorough checks to make sure you don't abuse it. This guy, 5 nights straight to finish a movie, and I guess there were some people on the set of At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul. The crew just really got tired, and they refused to shoot a scene. I guess there wasn't enough sunlight. So Mojica forced them to shoot the scene by pointing a gun at the cameraman. And I guess
that's the way to do it.
Yeah, well, various crew members have confirmed the story. According to Mojica, it was just a prop gun, but still, the guy had to keep making movies after movie after movie. One movie was done. Okay, I got to go on and make the next one and make the next one. And he just didn't have the money. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? The guy was poor. It's almost like Van Gogh or something, He was a troubled guy. He probably had ADHD or something, but the guy had to keep moving, and, his movies were barely seen, And it wasn't until I think it was the 90s or early 2000s where people actually were able to see it. There were some video companies that actually released these movies. But, back in the 80s, if you wanted to watch any of these movies, you had to get a bad VHS copy with no subtitles. And you're like, oh, okay, this is interesting vibe, but I don't know what they're saying.
Right. Yeah.
But, it's a very nightmarish world, and you wonder where did this guy get his stuff? Did he actually have these nightmares? Or did he hear old broadcasts of The Shadow or whatever?
Or maybe he was just a creative guy who liked the macabre.
Yeah, well, he was a very creative guy. They kind of put him like he was similar to Mario Bravo or Dario Argento, but came out before they did. I know Brava came out in the 60s. Argento came out and was prominent in the 70s. But, Mojica, I don't know. We don't really know what his influences are. We've seen there's some documentaries, but the guy just grew up around cinema, so he must have seen some of these movies.
I'm sure he did. And again, creative people are.
He's very creative. That's for sure.
Yeah, and this is just a testament to just having passion for your art and stopping at nothing to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's telling that he struggled his entire life, but still managed to get a good library of movies out and just never gave up on the dream. So good for him.
Oh, I know, and the fact that he didn't even want to be the Undertaker. He didn't want to play that part. The guy quit. And it's like, hey, I'm going to hire this guy. Okay, I can't. I've already spent my budget, so I guess I got to be the guy.
But he did what he had to do. And that's what I tell a lot of my friends who are musicians, actors, artists. You just if you want something, just you'll find a way to do it. And I always use Mr. Karloff as an example of not giving up on your craft or giving up on your. I mean, because remember. He was 41 years old when Frankenstein came out, and that was his biggest hit. And that's what put him on the map. And gave him his stardom. So, and unfortunately, Coffin Joe never got that stardom that Karloff wanted. But now, years after his death, he's relevant. He's unfortunately he can't reap the benefit of this.
No, he did get to see some of it near the end of his life because he would show up at different conventions. And he was very popular.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a huge... the cult following just keeps growing and growing in this amazing set from Arrow.
Well, it's great that he got to see some of the fruits of his labor.
He did get to see some of it, yes. I mean, just to get an idea, we these filmmakers are so passionate. Kevin Smith maxed out all of his credit cards just to get the movie made. I think Tarantino did the same thing. This guy... had to sell his car, sell his house, just so he could make this movie.
Yeah.
The very first Coffin Joe movie, At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. He had to sell his home and his car.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
But you do what you got to do.
You really got to want it. That's the thing. You go into the movie business thinking you're going to be Spielberg, who himself had a lot of struggles and bumps in the road before he got to Jaws, and I mean, people don't see the failures.
Success is like an iceberg. We only see the tip of it, but underneath the water, there's a massive amount of work and sacrifice.
Oh yeah,
right behind it. So I mean, and everyone who's successful has that same story.
Right. And at Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul was a huge success where it was able to be screened. At one theater had it for 4 months. I mean, in Brazil, it was a huge success. But again, the not every place in Brazil could play it because of all the censorship. You know? But it's interesting, and I guess the funny thing is we talk some of the props here. We talk about like Freddy Krueger and his claws. This guy literally had long fingernails. Not originally. He had longer thumbnails. So they had prosthetics in the first couple of movies, but later on, I mean, those are his real fingernails.
That's commitment.
Yeah, it is.
That's commitment.
That's like Daniel Day-Lewis type commitment right there. I mean, he literally became Coffin Joe. I mean, he had to do all these appearances. He had to do all of these things just to, make money so he can make more movies.
Right.
That's basically what he did. And the fact that, This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse was made in the 60s, there was not another official Coffin Joe movie until 2008.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's when Embodiment of Evil came out. That was the final trilogy. The final installment of the Coffin Joe franchise. I mean, gosh, 2008.
Wow.
That's like almost 40 years after. But I mean, he had the Coffin Joe guy in different anthologies and, hosting different things. But the actual story of Coffin Joe did not pick up for almost 40 years down the.
That's crazy.
After the second one came out, he had a hard time.
But again, that's commitment to your art. That's commitment to your,
Yeah, I mean, he did a lot of ploitation movies. I say ploitation because you just put sex in there and, drugs and whatever, But, I mean, at least when you're watching a 20-minute sequence of torture, rape, sodomization, drugs, at least when Mojica did it was interesting to watch. It was interesting. It's not necessarily a good watch, but it's interesting, I mean, not all of these movies I can easily recommend, but, if you just focus on the 3 Coffin Joe movies, there's some interesting stuff in there. And again, none of them hit the heights of the first, At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, but they do stand pretty well on their own. So you only seen one of them, so that kind of...
Yeah.
So you saw The Strange World of Coffin Joe.
Right.
What did you enjoy watching it?
Yeah, I did. Visually it was, I really enjoyed it. Like you said, you get 3 short stories in one movie. I've always liked anthology movies like that. They're fun, especially in the horror genre.
Yeah.
Again, maybe it's because I just don't go out of my way to really try to watch foreign films. I get so distracted with the subtitles. At times it gets frustrating for me to watch. So, I mean, but I enjoyed it. I like the Coffin Joe's monologues between the movies. Like I said, you had 3 shorts. You had The Doll Maker. You had Obsession. Theory.
Obsession, to say the least.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of sex in Obsession.
Yes.
And, I mean, these are exploitative is...
But again, we have to go back in his time frame,
Yeah.
I mean, there was a military dictatorship. You had the Catholic Church, and literally the church was behind a lot of the censorship that tried to trim his movies. Mm-hmm. I mean, Awakening of the Beast, is a good example. 20 years after he made it, he was finally able to get it out there.
Wow.
20 years. So you think about it, 1969 that came out. 1989
right.
was when people actually got to see it.
Wow.
Several critics were very harsh on Mojica's Coffin Joe appearance, and it's great to watch him now, but I can't put myself in the mindset of being in Brazil, 1964, 1965, when these movies first came out.
Right.
I was just floored when I first saw him almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, see, and I haven't seen any of the documentaries in the box set or anything like that on Coffin Joe. I almost wonder, being in Brazil, what his struggles were, because obviously in the 60s, there's not much he can do. But as we got into the 80s and the big horror boom of the 80s, where you had, not only Famous Monsters of Filmland, you had the Fangoria magazines and, media that could really... help him find an American distribution. How he, and all those magazines have talked wonderfully about him,
right? And
have wrote many articles. So I really don't understand. I don't know if it was a personal thing or a financial thing of, how he was never really able, especially during that period of time when just horror was on top of the world, to get any sort of American distribution for any of his movies, whether it be VHS or... Well,
there were some like really bad bootleg video cassettes that you could get.
Yeah.
But you have to pay. He would have had to pay for distribution on that, and the guy barely made any money off of these movies.
Yeah, I mean, again,
that's the thing that's awful. Is any money he made, he put into getting the next movie out,
right?
Because the guy constantly wanted to keep making movies. Mm-hmm. And he took all sorts of drugs, and the guy, I think he had strokes and heart attacks. I read that he had strokes and heart attacks throughout his life.
Gotcha.
I mean, it was just kind of rough to try to get these movies out. There's a booklet inside the box set, And there's this book in the 80s. I'm trying to find the name of it. I can't remember the name of it, but there was this book that came out in like 1986 that talked about all of these different world horror films, and Mojica's movies were definitely mentioned. They're kind of harsh about them.
Right.
You know, but at least people in America could at least see some of these images in a book and be like, this is interesting. It was just really hard to get a hold of this, you know, trying to find movies of this nature. Okay, it was Phil Hardy. Phil Hardy did a book about transgressive horror directors. Gene Rollin was mentioned in there. Nakagawa, another famous Japanese horror filmmaker. And Mojica was obviously mentioned in this as well. And then there was some sort of Seattle-based company, Something Weird Video, that was able to, you know, get out some of these lesser-known movies like Herschel Gordon Lewis. I'm sure you've heard of that guy.
Yep.
Doris Wishman. Of course, Mojica's Coffin Joe trilogy, kind of, that was like the door opening for people to actually see them kind of the way they were supposed to be seen. It's actually, you know, because of these film buffs that we're able to get some of these movies seen.
Right.
And I didn't know about Coffin Joe until like, I think it was like the mid 2000s when I saw it on IFC. I was interested and enjoyed it, but it's like I didn't seek it out for whatever reason. But then I saw this, you know, when Arrow put together this stunning box set, and I was just like, man, oh man, I've got to get a hold of this. There's like 11 Coffin Joe type movies. I only thought there was 2. And then I found out there was a third one, you know, made in 2008. So I was like, okay, cool. And it had all of those movies. And you really need to like the 3 Coffin Joe movies if you want to get this set. Again, the other movies are kind of a hit and miss. I watched The Strange World of Coffin Joe for the first time a few months ago. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Very exploitative. That was,
1968,
again,
man.
He was fighting back against the establishment, and that was one way he could do it. Now, you had Abbas Kiarostami. He was an Iranian filmmaker. Talk about one masterpiece after the other. Did the Coker trilogy, Taste of Cherry, Close Up, all of these really phenomenal movies. He was very subtle about critiquing the establishment without saying too much. Mojica, on the other hand, screamed it out loud, as you could see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So much so that everyone was trying to get him censored and got to trim this, got to trim that. And just the fact that he was able to get these movies out, like you said, is just what an accomplishment.
Sure. Again, that's just a testament to someone who loves his art and,
and
you know, never wanting to give up on the dream, and good for him. And yeah, well, like you, other than through horror media like Famous Monsters, Fangoria, Rue Morgue, Horror Hound, all those magazines and publications, reading articles that had mentioned Coffin Joe every once in a while, even though they mentioned him in his movies in a positive and good light. Until we decided to do the show, I never really sought out his movies until, you know, I noticed on Shudder that they had, you know, The Strange World of Coffin Joe, but pretty hard to find. I mean, again, obviously Arrow's got the box set now, but
the box set really, you know, has really made it more appealing, and it's good that Shudder even actually has a movie on.
Well, Shudder's such a fantastic.
It's a streaming
platform for horror. I can't. Yeah. I mean, we're not sponsored by them, but I'll talk for days about how wonderful Shudder is.
Tubi does a good job too of throwing out some really out there horror films, again, like Lady Frankenstein. You can watch it on Tubi. It's another interesting movie. Mojica is definitely a filmmaker that everyone should at least watch. At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul, and This Night, I'll Possess Your Corpse, and The Embodiment of Evil. Those are the 3 that if you're kind of curious about Mojica's cinema, those are the 3 I'd start with. I mean, that's the Coffin Joe trilogy. If you like what you watch, I highly recommend, you know, The Strange World of Coffin Joe, Awakening of the Beast, The End of Man. It's interesting, The End of Man and When Gods Fall Asleep and stuff like that, he almost plays like a Messiah type figure. It's not Coffin Joe. It's kind of a variation, like he kind of performs miracles.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's all of these evil things that go on, and when The End of Man, when the gods fall asleep and stuff like that, he shows up, the evil stops. It's interesting. It's not something you would expect from the guy who made At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. Completely different. Yes, there's still some violence and there's still lots of sexploitation and stuff like that in those movies, but he makes himself into a Messiah type figure. Again, a way to push back on the establishment. So Again, I mean, I don't agree with everything that the guy says or does, but I do find him very fascinating. He made some very interesting films. Get inside the mind of Coffin Joe, and I mean, if you love horror films and you're not watching any of these movies, you've got a huge blind spot.
I'm really going to try to force myself to get over my ADD when it comes to foreign films and subtitles to really try to get into these.
Old Boy. You really liked Old Boy.
Yeah.
And now you've got The Strange World of Coffin Joe under your belt.
Yep, yeah, and I'm looking forward to exploring it a little bit more.
Yeah, because, again, at midnight, I'll take your soul. This night, I'll possess your corpse. Embodiment of Evil. It's a pretty interesting trilogy right there.
Yeah.
I don't want to delve too much in the storylines because, again, there's a good chunk of people that are listening that probably have already seen these movies, but there's probably a lot more that haven't. I kind of want to tease you with it so it excites you, and hopefully this sparks an interest in Mojica cinema so you're like, I got to at least give this guy a shot. Start with those 3 movies. Those are the 3 movies I would start with.
And look, who doesn't like a really cool horror character? The Coffin Joe Undertaker character is just awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
creepy, awesome.
And the people in the movie that are against Coffin Joe, they're not the nicest themselves. They're kind of picking on him, snickering behind his back. There's a scene in a bar, like a tavern. It's like a Western.
Yeah.
He goes in there. People are kind of like, oh God, it's him. Like an outlaw.
Yeah.
He's like an outlaw kind of figure. And they start antagonizing each other. He literally takes change and starts whipping the friggin' guy. It's like, it's not like a Western, with fist fights and stuff, but he gets on top of the bar and he's like kicking the guy, stepping on his back, and then he's whipping him with chains.
Unconventional.
That's Mojica cinema, the most unconventional horror stuff that you've ever witnessed. It really is. The techniques with the camera, the editing, it was just way ahead of its time, and people are watching it now, and I'm sure they're being inspired. I mean, this guy is a huge inspiration to never give up.
Absolutely. And
whether you agree with his politics or his beliefs, I'm not an atheist. I'm a follower of Christ, but I totally understand where this guy comes from. I'm not a huge fan of established religion myself, the way the hypocrites are, and that's what I get out of it is these hypocrites. He really points his finger at them, at all establishment. And there's a lot of stuff in the later movies, with the military dictatorship and stuff in there as well, that he really, wow, how did he get this through? It's impressive. It really is. And again, not all the films have their ups and downs, but, if you watch the Coffin Joe trilogy, start there. That's a perfect place to start your Mojica cinema journey. So inside the mind of Coffin Joe, again, Arrow has this amazing set. There was a problem with one of the discs, but that has been corrected. Sit back and enjoy the mind of Coffin Joe, if you will. Let us know what you think about Coffin Joe. If you've seen these movies, you've liked them, you've disliked them, well, interact with us. We always encourage that. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram. Just drop us a message, because we want to know what you think, not only of Coffin Joe, but maybe you have some other world cinema icon you would like us to spotlight. Again, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, Scared for Reals, very easy to find.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Real.